thanks everyone for joining us today. We're back with another live interview with the British Esports Association. I'm joined today by, is it fair to call you UK Esports royalty, Ryan?
Possibly.
An absolute, a British fighting game legend, the most decorated esports player from the UK. Is that correct?
Yes, that's possibly correct, yes.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us today, Ryan. I really appreciate it. And for anyone who's tuning in, we've done a couple of these interviews in the past where we interview people from different sectors, from different areas of esports, just to find out a bit about their career, a bit about them, and any tips for you guys out there on how to get a career in esports. And of course, Ryan, you're a current advisory board member of the British Esports Association. You've been involved with us for a while now, which we really appreciate. I have to be honest, Ryan, when I was doing research and everything before this interview, one thing I was struggling with was knowing where to start, because you've done so much, and you've achieved a lot. Maybe your recent induction into the International Video Game Hall of Fame would be a good start as we can look back on what you've done.
Right.
So what was that like? They recognise you for over 300 tournament wins.
I mean, it's a really nice feeling to have people kind of look at what you've done over a long period of time. It's not just a couple of things that have happened recently. So it really meant a lot to me because, it kind of didn't get swept under the rug. I mean, there's lots of times where post-event, there wasn't much talk about what happened and so on. So you don't always know what it meant to people, or if people even, saw it, or if they remember it when time goes by. So to have them come up with, data that's been collated where they've put together a number of statistics and put a figure on top of that, and then kind of presented me an award based on the back of those efforts is a really nice compliment. And it also, is a very nice kind of attribute in terms of acknowledging the consistency and the longevity my career has had. And those are things that are not often talked about. So, it really meant a lot to me.
And where did that take place? That was in the States, right?
It was in a place called Ottumwa in Iowa, in the US. And I was invited to fly out, but just with a lot happening at the moment, I couldn't be there in person. So they had me send in a video, via webcam, and kind of accept the award that way.
Neon Phoenix BTW has asked in the chat, which is a good question, really, because I didn't actually say this. What game is Ryan pro in? I mean, there's been so many, right?
Yeah. I mean, over the years, I think the first game that I reached, the top level in the UK at was probably Tekken 2, way back. Wow. We're talking 1995 now. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I can remember getting that game when I was like 10, 11 years old. It makes me feel old.
So Tekken 2 is where it began, and then it branched over to King of Fighters, and Street Fighter was always there. Yeah. And then later on came Virtua Fighter, and I just managed to stay with all of those franchises as they evolved. And so with each iteration, I would win the tournament, either the national tournament or the European or the world for the latest game, whatever was out. So before I knew it, I was a champion at multiple games, but it was never planned to be that way.
No, it must be interesting to have gone from game to game. There are some players out there that switch from game to game. I've seen people in FPS titles switch and continue as a pro. Was that a big challenge for you? Because,
I mean, trying out a new game also meant being introduced to a brand new community where you didn't really know anyone, and so you're the outsider coming in. So it was always a bit difficult because, essentially you don't know the ins and outs of the game, you don't know the intricacies that everyone else shares, so there's a little bit of a disadvantage when you're new. But I really enjoyed that path, that specifically that struggle in the beginning stages of learning a game is what I really thrived in, a scenario I thrived in. So I think that because I enjoyed it so much, the trials and tribulations of that journey didn't really matter to me, because it was more about what I had achieved. Even if I had lost to a multitude of players that day, I would only focus on the 2 or 3 people that I did manage to beat. And that would be my uplifting point. And I think because it wasn't necessarily about being the best, it was just about having fun, it was a lot easier to actually just enjoy the experience rather than kind of like mulling over why I'm not the best and so on. It wasn't that kind of journey. I mean, I think a lot of the younger players today are faced with these challenges quite early on into gaming, that they need to be the best or perform at the tournament and so on, which back in the day during the arcade days wasn't such a big factor.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Ryan. I think this is a hard question here. I will just say, for those of you in the chat as well, if you want to ask Ryan any questions, please do. I put a post out on Reddit the other day, and I've got a few questions for the end as well. But that's the beauty of these live interviews. And this video will be posted on YouTube and across our other channels afterwards for people to watch and get advice and things as well. So
That's good.
one thing I wanted to ask, Ryan, is what is your most memorable achievement or tournament experience? I mean, you've had so many.
That's a tough one. Yeah, I mean, I've been asked, similar questions before, and my usual answer is that there are many that are special. I don't want to say they're all special, but there are some specific ones that have very unique value, but it's for different reasons. It's not just because of the magnitude, it's not just because of the prize pool, it's not just because of the location. Depending on what my life looked like at that time, the win will have either meant a bit more or a bit less to me. If it's a period where I was winning everything, one extra win in that streak probably wouldn't have been as much as a win when I haven't won anything for a long time, and then I finally, break through this barrier and win. So, I think it really comes down to what was happening, what was the shape of my life in that period, and it comes down to that. But, what comes to mind initially was, of course, traveling to the US and defeating the Korean champion on Tekken Tag 1.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting challenge because although the battle between me and him wasn't necessarily a tournament, it was a long, grueling battle. It lasted over 4 hours. But that was during a time where Europe as a continent were looked down on a lot by the rest of the gaming world. It was always said that you can't be any good. You're from the UK. How good can you really be? And so on. And there was always this, kind of anything you did from the UK would come under scrutiny. Who do you think you are? How dare you challenge the Japanese champion and so on? And it was quite difficult to establish yourself. I mean, you have to bear in mind we didn't have the, social media outlets that we have in great number nowadays. And, couldn't just load up someone on YouTube and watch their matches, for example. It was really complicated. It was really hard to know who's just talking and who's actually really good. Yeah. So when I traveled to America to play the Korean champion, it was a very tense time in the community. I also didn't know how well I'd be able to perform versus a Korean champion because a Western player had never beaten a Korean champion on Tekken at that time. So yeah, it was a big challenge for me. And one thing that I decided to do, I wanted to make the challenge, I wanted to have the challenge be the entire continent versus the Korean champion, not just me. And one thing I decided to do was before I flew out to America, I asked every single player that I could get my hands on that had played me in the past, even players, because I was the best in Europe at that time. But even though I was the best in Europe, I still found a lot of value in asking advice from players that I'd played, even if it was players that couldn't beat me and so on. That didn't mean anything to me. All that mattered was that we were going to be a team and we were going to fight against the Korean guy together through my hands kind of thing. They valued that a lot. That even though I could beat them all, I still had a place for learning from them within me. And that's something that I believe in heavily. Even to this day, I always think it's a big strength to know that people that are not necessarily better than you can still teach you things, and people that you can't beat on the game is not an indication of you not being able to teach them something. You can always share knowledge throughout. It's very, very intertwined how knowledge is dispersed between people. But ultimately I beat the Korean champion and I became the first ever Western player to beat a Korean champion on Tekken, and it's been something that's kind of spearheaded a lot of other players to come out from different places on different games and be able to get wins over top players from Southeast Asia. So I'm very proud of that as a very small achievement in one ways, but a very big one in others.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And just out of interest, Ryan, would you say that's the case now? I don't follow fighting games as closely as other games, but I get the impression North America has done quite well in recent years.
Yeah, so North America, a very talented continent. They've always had strong players, and they've always had a very unique approach to the fighting game community, which is partly why I've always enjoyed going there, because, you know, when I went to America, it was a different take on fighting games. The same games that I've been playing for years, but approached a different way, which means that, you know, the fruits of that labor would be different as well. So when I'd go there to play against opponents, they would do things I didn't expect. They would know stuff I didn't know. And it was always this great learning process of this mixture of cultures coming together, you know, approaches to games, different communities mixing their knowledge together. So, North America have done well. They've also struggled, though, going up against like top Japanese players and top Korean players over the years, as have we all, you know. But I feel like as the shape of fighting games has changed over the decades, it's, you know, we've come to a place where on certain games, in the past, you would have seen a complete Southeast Asia domination, but now there's a bit more of a balance. And in some cases, America dominating, you know, or Europe dominating, and so on. So it's definitely a lot more interesting these days, the general ecosystem of fighting games.
I like what you said as well about, you know, you can learn from people who might not be as good as you, and vice versa, because
totally.
I think people sometimes forget, if you lose in a final, you lose in a match, you know, you could play that same game again the next day and win comfortably. And that's the beauty of sports and esports, right? It's in that moment. Someone could have an off day and so on.
It's totally true. I mean, in an event, you know, you're dealing with multiple elements. You know, you're not just talking about your training in the tournament. You're also looking at how much sleep have you had. Have you had something to eat that day? Are you cold? You know, do you have a headache? Like, there's so many things that go into a match. You know, a match that's played in real time, that's performed in front of a live audience. There's so many elements to that. I mean, you've got to be super strong to perform in front of other people where you know that you're in the spotlight. You know, everything that you do is being monitored by maybe hundreds, maybe thousands in person, and who knows, millions around the world online watching the stream. So a lot of those things produce nerves, and nerves often produce mistakes and elements that you end up looking back on and thinking, oh, why on earth did I do that, or why didn't I do that? But yeah, it definitely brings out some talking points.
Absolutely. Just replying to Neon Phoenix, your question, Neon, is tied in with something I'm going to ask a little bit later, so I'll come back to that on social media. I wanted to ask Ryan what it's been like playing competitively for this amount of time, you know, and are there aspects of the role that people don't really think about? Because we've touched on some there, nerves and all these different factors, you know. The idea of a pro player these days seems to be quite glamorized, and you've touched on that a bit, you know, that you don't always need to be the best all the time. You know, would you agree with that, you know?
So, you know, being a pro in anything comes with always comes with things you don't expect. There'll be parts of it that you were prepared for, and there'll always be curveballs. That's just the way of the world. Now, I think that over the years it's definitely changed a lot in terms of what, you know, in terms of defining what a pro player is, what a pro player does. I think, you know, back when I was a teenager, a pro player was essentially someone who would have to play the game a lot, but it wasn't as much about media representation. You know, I think the pro player today is expected to have a presence on social media, is expected to have some kind of YouTube channel or something where they're visible, you know, a stream. Maybe they stream on Twitch or Mixer or whatever, but there's got to be a physical presence through the internet that's accessible through the internet for people to, you know, watch, you know, and when I was coming up, there wasn't this pressure. There wasn't this, oh my goodness, you have to be visible. Everyone's got to know your handle online. Everyone's got to know what your Twitter is so they can follow you. Like, all these things weren't a thing. Extended pressures when I was coming up was just kind of, I don't know, just staying on top, I think, because that was your outlet, that was where you were seen. So if you weren't the champion, then all the attention went to the champion, and it wasn't so much around the surrounding top players, I would say. But travel got a lot bigger because sponsors got bigger, so you were able to have access to more countries. There wasn't as much entire global travel. It was more in your continent or in your area. If you were an American top player, I'm sure that most of the travel was done between the states. I don't think we didn't have so many Americans coming to Europe. I mean, we did occasionally. I got to go to Japan. We had Japanese players come to the UK often, but there wasn't this completely free reign of travel like now. Literally all the pro players are everywhere in the world, whether it's South America, North America, Southeast Asia, Europe. Like, it's just literally anyone could be anywhere, and it's not weird. Whereas back today, if I said, "Oh, hey, I'm in Costa Rica for a Capcom Pro Tour tournament," that would have been like, "What are you doing there?" So it's just completely different now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've seen that rise of social media throughout your career. And, I've seen, while it can be a great tool, it can also be a bit of a hotbed for drama and allows players to react emotionally to tournament results and so on. What would you say to players nowadays looking to build their brand, about getting that balance right?
The thing with social media, and, I have experience of not having experience, which is a big thing for any pro player. When you're introduced to social media and you hook your accounts up or whatever, you tie in your email to them and you start having a presence on any platform, you're then introduced into this world of millions of people that you either know or don't know, but essentially you can't see, and you have no idea about context when they type, you have no idea what their emotional state is, you have no idea how they mean things. And all of that has to get digested within your system around how you feel, your emotional state. Are you happy? Are you upset about an event? Blah, blah, blah. So that already is a very difficult, mixing pot. It's a very difficult concoction right there. But then on top of that, you have, essentially young, talented players coming into this world with no social media experience whatsoever. They have no acumen in that area. They're new, they're freshmen. So you can have this overflow, this spillage of emotion sometimes from players who are not accustomed to how social media works, and that can often backfire. And, again, I speak from experience there too. But I think the difficulty with social media, and a very sensitive topic that people have to kind of bear in mind, I think, is that gamers predominantly come from very difficult backgrounds. A lot of gamers, or I dare say most gamers have had difficulty in their families, integrating into society, whether it's about school, whether it's about in their neighborhood, whatever, right? So it can be very difficult to, you're already in a world where you might feel like you don't fit, or you might feel like, you're not very comfortable in who you are. You're still learning about life, the world. You're learning about yourself. Who are you? What do you want to do? Like all these different question marks that you have floating around in your head. And gaming was a platform for a lot of these players to get away from all the questions. Gaming is where you're doing your thing, and that's fun, and it's good like that. But then you get good one day. And then after you get good, suddenly somebody wants to talk to you because, you've won something, and they want to know how you feel about it, and they want to interview you, and you have a microphone shoved in your mouth, and you have people with lenses and flashes taking pictures of you, and it's like, what's going on? And it's crazy because ultimately the very thing that you played games to get away from is now up close and personal in your face, 100%. And although there's a nice side to that, because it means you're wanted and, you're welcomed and people value you now, it's also extremely terrifying. It's really scary, that every word you say is being analyzed, and everything that you do, the way you look, your clothing, how you walk, like, you know what I'm saying? Like everything is all of a sudden under a microscope by people that you have no idea who they are, and all these anonymous faces, so I think for up-and-coming gamers, it's really important to support them, and it's really important for them to know that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay. We've all been there before. I think it's bad when people kind of sort of this Japanese mentality where, you can't make any mistakes. Everything's got to be done flawlessly. Yeah. I think it's okay to be human, and we have to let people know it's okay to be human, no matter the age, whether you're a new gamer blossoming in your teens or whether you're someone who's coming back into it as a slightly older person. It's all good. But at the end of the day, social media is something that the world is fairly new to, even still. There's many people that don't know about Twitter still now. Yeah. Twitter, what's that? What are these posts? What's this picture? Like, people don't understand. Not everyone knows what a hashtag is. Seriously, it sounds funny if you know. It sounds funny if you're someone who's into that world. Like, how can anyone know? But there are people who don't know about these things because that's not their world.
My mum.
Exactly. But parents is a good example as well, because they lived in a different time.
Yeah.
So, and also because a lot of the older people now are fully developed in their lives. They don't need to add these things. They don't need to start an Instagram account now. They don't all feel the need to just have an account on Twitter.
Yeah.
So for them, it's just this thing that young people do. But sometimes that can create a divide between parents and kids' relationships, because there's this element they don't know, they don't understand. There's a portion, there's a piece of their child's life they don't connect with, and all that can cause kind of disturbance in the force, in the family force. I think it's really important to try and pay close attention to these things, because I don't know how many parents are going to watch this, but imagine your kid comes, really upset about something that happened on social media or getting flamed on an internet chat or whatever. That's really difficult to deal with, and it's nice if your family have got your back, if your family can support you, because as many fans as you may have online, people aren't that supportive when it comes to getting flamed and stuff. There'll be one or two people, but if there's a hater that starts attacking you, it can be really difficult as the person in that spotlight to kind of deal with that without going down to their level of, childishness or whatever. Because usually, haters usually attack you from a very childish standpoint. So it's hard to kind of dissolve that nonsense without going down to that level as well. So it really helps if you have support in that situation, that, hey, this is happening, we acknowledge that this is happening to you and we support you, we're with you in this, don't worry,
Yeah.
And even more so for younger people, I think they need as much warmth and comfort from people around them as possible. So even if it's not parents, even if it's siblings, or even if it's just close friends, supporting pro players and supporting their journey, essentially, because this is their journey, is paramount to their progress. And you have to bear in mind that not everyone makes it. I mean, if you look at something like the last Evolution Championship Series in Las Vegas, that had thousands of players there. 5,000 or something players were in attendance to play in tournaments. But out of all those tournaments, out of all those thousands of players, there was one champion per tournament. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah. So if a tournament had 1,500 players, 1,499 players lost. They're losers, essentially. Losers, right? So not everyone makes it. There are players that enter the gaming world. They may become good. They may become very good. They may even be semi-pro. They might make it a certain part down the way, but they might not all become world champions and so on. So there's a degree of disappointment. There's a degree of failure that is going to be introduced at some point in their life, and that is going to require a lot of love and a lot of support to get them through that. You never know what that's going to do to a young person that's never been in a situation where they could really be something that means something to them. So if they don't make that, because many people don't, most people don't, there needs to be a soft bed for them to fall on. You see what I'm saying? There needs to be a support cushion at the end of that road. I as an older person, I look back and think that's something that would have been really helpful, for myself and for the community I grew up around, seeing what happened to them, having that would have been really, 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 really important. Having those things. Definitely.
And that's harder in fighting games as well, isn't it, arguably, because you're by yourself at events a lot of the time. You're not in a team of 5. You don't have a coach following you around or a manager, so that's hard. You've got extra burden on your shoulders.
Totally. I mean, one of the bigger problems there is also when you get into the pro world, people take advantage of you a lot. And because you don't have, a group of guys also in the same situation, it's harder to talk through these things. It's harder to have someone with you who kind of knows these things. And I mean, I'm sure this happens even in team-based games as well, because essentially, esports or professional gaming is something that we're still tweaking to this day. How contracts are written out, how events are put on, what kind of stadiums are hired, what kind of bands are hired to perform at the stadium. Like, the whole system of how this is put together, the whole infrastructure is always seeing modifications every day. So if you're a young player and you're coming to this, and now you've been approached by a team that want to work with you, want to pick you up, how do you know if you're getting a good deal? How do you know if they're just using you? How do you know? A lot of the time they call it sponsorship, but it's more like the player sponsoring the team rather than the other way around. So it's always I think one area that I really value the Esports Advisory Board for is that we are in a position where we could help young kids to get the right deal, or get the right advice, and be in a situation where they're being respected for their value and not just being taken advantage of because they have no business acumen, and because they're young, and because they're really hungry to be pro players. Like, that's not the right way to do it, and because we don't set up the future for a positive path either if we do that. But I've seen so many companies try and get into pro gaming, try and get into esports, and just fall along the wayside because their interests were corrupted from the beginning. They had no interest in actually doing things straight down the middle, giving people equal opportunity, being fair. They just wanted to make a fast buck, basically. It's always that. Just wanted to make a fast buck and utilize these young players as well as they could. I've had personal experience in that as well. I definitely haven't been given my value with a lot of the teams that I've played for. So I also felt the brunt of what that can be like, and it's definitely not nice. So yeah, that's one area that I think kids these days, now that there's some serious money involved as well, especially, should be warned about.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good to have you on our advisory board, because this video, I'll share this in our email newsletter, on our socials, and I know that we do have many parents. They contact us almost every day, how can my son or my daughter get into this game, or get into casting and so on.
It's because they don't know. They don't know.
So to have you doing the interview, I think will be really beneficial. And you raised some really good points there, Ryan, and I just want to add to one of them. Although I'm not a pro gamer, there was something I related to there on a couple of points. You're right, gaming, I think, it offers escapism to a lot of people. So if there's something, I used to be quite anxious as a teenager. Gaming was a nice escape because I didn't have to worry about socialising or meeting new people or whatever else. It was a nice escape for me. I was lucky that I had friends and things and good family, but it still helped me cope with things. And also, I will say, going from that, where gaming is an escape, to now, where gaming is my job. When I play a game now, I don't see it in the same way anymore, because I work and I write about these games and I write about esports players. So for me, it's less of a switch off as it was before. Now reading and other things has become more of an escapist for me. So that's something to be aware of. Anyone watching this, if you do want a career in esports or gaming, that's something to bear in mind, because you will see games in a different light, right? You've played games so much, you practice so hard. I don't know if you ever get sick of them, but you've played it so much, you see it in a different light, right? Is it less fun and more of like a job?
It depends. I think anything that you do professionally becomes a job. If you're playing professionally for an organization, for a team, if there's money that is flowing around to support what you're doing, that money has to be turned around into something. There has to be some kind of return. And that demand for the return on investment creates pressure for the player. So I think that if it's a job, there will always be an element of the thing not being fun. There'll be a part of it that's about getting it done rather than it being this enjoyable experience. So I'm sure, pro players try and combine the two as much as possible, because we're always in search for that, what's enjoyable, what's entertaining. We always want that. But if it's a job where you're playing for a team that has expectations, and you go to the event and you don't perform to their expectation level, there's an issue there. So, you can set things up in a way that creates unhappiness. If you constantly have someone telling you that you're not performing to what they expect, it's hard to be happy. You're not going to feel comfort in those words. And if you're always performing to a place where they're happy with you, then it's easier to kind of bundle happiness in the package of a pro player. So it often comes from what you're told. If you're told that there's these expectations you need to live up to, that can affect your happiness. So it's a very heavy burden to play as a pro player because of the expectation. And also, a lot of the time for these pro players who've usually come into gaming quite poor, these paychecks they're getting are often, going to feed them or pay rent or, things that they, integral parts of their daily life, nothing to do with gaming kind of thing. So, but the answer of do gaming become less fun is really dependent on how you utilize gaming, what it's there for. I mean, when I worked with Japanese publishers as a full-time employee, as an analyst there, it's nothing to do with, being a pro player, but you're playing games all the time because, it's all about investment and it's all about looking at certain games. Is it worth creating a sequel for this game because it's popular in this continent? How many units could we sell in this area for this, up and coming franchise or whatever? Do we have this third party title published in Asia or in Europe? Just all these different topics that will come up when you actually work in a publisher that you don't have anything to do with when you're just a pro player. So again, it's gaming, but it's a completely different element of gaming. It's a completely different side, different area of gaming as an industry. So I think anything you do full time has its limits, and you'll always need to take a break from it, no matter what it is. Whether it's gaming, whether it's a sport, whether it's like one of the more traditional sports like football, rugby, tennis, whether you're a singer and you need to take a break from the studio, or like whatever your thing is that earns your bread. Basically, there comes a time where that needs to go on pause, and then you do something else to just kind of clear your head.
And you mentioned some other roles you've had there, Ryan. I really want to ask you about that because I think you've got unique experiences there. Just before we move on, just on the social media point, Neon Phoenix asked, have you used your professional level of play in order to grow your social media following and gain revenue from Twitch, YouTube, etc.? Now, you work for ESL, right? So you don't actually push your own individual channels? Is that fair to say? So,
I work for ESL and I'm also pushing my own individual channels, but I'm quite late to the dance on that one. I think I started doing later than other people in my kind of radius of pro gamers that I think I am doing that now, but for me it's really interesting actually, because I don't really hear other people thinking the same way as me in this particular area, but pro gaming for me has never ever been about money. It has never been about how much money can I make, or I need to earn money from gaming. Gaming was always and has always been a side hobby. I managed to get really good at it. So because of how good I am, people think it's my full-time thing. But I've always worked full-time. I've always, before ESL, I was at Nintendo before, I was at Sega way back. I've always had a full-time job. And that was how I financed a lot of my tournaments because, gaming wasn't as big back then. So coming up, of course, eventually gaming started to pay out. I joined teams and, that would also bring money sometimes. So eventually gaming started to produce, some money. But even then, I wanted to work and I would find, different jobs and I would do things. And gaming became a better environment for me because of that. Because I didn't have this constant pressure to perform all the time, I enjoyed games more. And I think my results probably showed a lot of that happiness come through because there wasn't this constant pressure of needing to do stuff. I had my money, I had my bills covered or whatever because I'm working. But then on the side of working, I still have this pro gaming thing, which is my escape from real life. Yeah. So while other players were really stressed as pro gamers around me, I was always quite relaxed in the knowledge that I have my home, my sanctuary, I have things going on. There's been times where it was more difficult though. There's times where I wasn't working. I remember a period where I wanted to make it, this professional thing. I wanted to try and just have a go at making that my only thing. But I don't think I was ever as happy doing it like that. It isn't fun to know that if you don't win this tournament, you can't do certain things. Like that for me, I didn't ever enjoy that. That it was always way better. Maybe because I started out as a hobby. So for me, I'd already had the experience of knowing how much fun it is when it's just your escape and it's just your happy place. Yeah. Going from that to this is the stress and daily labor and really boring kind of just really dry elements of a job after you do it for a long time. You know, all these things that like having to train at home in the lab, we call it, when you practice at home by yourself. It's called being in the lab. And having to, you know, be in the lab by myself and work out these different intricacies of the game so that I can win the next tournament. Like, those things are quite boring, but you have to do it now. It's no longer your free time option. It's this is your, I'm getting up early, starting training at 9 a.m., having a break for lunch later on, continuing. Like, this is your actual job, you know? So yeah, in my past, that wasn't ever as interesting as it was when it was just for fun outside of my full-time occupation.
Yeah, no, I hear that. And at ESL, and the jobs you had at Nintendo and Sega, could you tell us a bit about what you've done there? And
they're all really different, so which one do you want to know about?
I'm going to be nosy and say all of them, Ryan. Nintendo, Sega, ESL. ESL is more of like a host and a content position, is that right?
So at ESL, I'm predominantly a content creator, but I also run some of the channels there, social media channels, and I'm also an influencer for them. And yeah, and you know, the social media department has a lot of different things, you know, a lot of business development areas. Like there's no one in the department does one thing. We all do multiple things. And yeah, you know, I've been a desk host at events. I've been a commentator at other events. I've hired a team and created content. You know, I've had like a team that come on board and that I've worked with to produce content at some of the biggest ESL products. So it's, I mean, there's so much that goes on every day at ESL. There's no way to kind of encompass it all in like a small, you can't really box it up and put a ribbon around it. But essentially I work with a team that will bring in, you know, people that are needed to do a job, and we'll work together and we'll produce something.
And you've done other things as well, Ryan. You mentioned people judging people on clothing and things like that. You've done some. You've been a model, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. So yeah, I've done a bit of modeling as well. I think I was just approached. I just got an email, you know, my public email. People can send me messages, and I got an email asking me if I wanted to be part of this. I think it was an autumn-winter collection, the first one, or it might have been spring-summer. Yeah. But they wanted me to be one of the models, and it, you know, included going to the studio and shooting and changing outfits numerous times in the shoot, and it was really interesting. But I really had a chance. Now I really appreciate, you know, people that only model full time, and this is what they do, because it's very, very hard work. It's very stressful. Can be very stressful.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because there are pro gamers out there that are required to do things now. You know, people sign into teams like Fnatic. They have to pose for the new jerseys and the new streetwear and things like that. And that's similar as well, you know. And
totally. You have obligations now. Yeah, you have obligations now. So it's, I mean, again, this is something at ESL where you kind of look at packages, social media packages that are put together to kind of produce, you know, really quality content that uplift events all around the world and kind of make them way better than they would be without it, basically. But, you know, players essentially have to do the same thing too, just because, you know, like the team has an image. You know, the owner of the team will have an image in mind that he wants kind of produced and replicated by every team player. So that's going to include going to photo shoots, going to PR events, being visible here and there, and just kind of concentrating on a stream, you know, like a consistent stream of content in between each event, you know what I mean, each tournament. Yeah. So
Simper Heave has asked on Twitch, since you work full time, do you plan your practice time ahead to make sure you get the most out of it? If so, how do you divide it up? That's a good question. It's not easy, is it?
It's definitely not easy, and I think there's always some sacrifice either way, however you look at it. Either you're playing more and sacrificing elsewhere, or you're playing less and the gaming takes a sacrifice. So I think that yes, a part of it is about being quite organized about what events are upcoming and who's going to be there and preparing for that. But it's also a question of timing as well, because, you know, real life will present its own challenges day to day, and there'll be days where you don't have time because you have to do something that's more important. So it's about planning, and it's about having a very, very organized schedule, but also being very realistic about what you expect. You know, you're not going to pin 10 hours a day into practicing on a game, which is also going to be reflected in your results. So I think that when you know that you're juggling, like work, when you're trying to contain that work-life balance entirely, with gaming included, I really feel that it's about being quite realistic about your expectations there, and that also helps to build each and every event as well.
Absolutely. I'm conscious of your time, Ryan. I know you're busy. I'll try and keep to a few more questions. I really wanted to ask about how you got into this. I know you mentioned the Tekken and things like that, but I read that you first got into games when you visited your local arcade at 10 years old.
So yeah. When I was 10, I lived in Battersea at that time. I didn't move to Croydon until I was like 13, 14. But when I was 10, I went to... I don't even know where I was going. I think I was going to a market. There was a market I used to like visiting. And on the way to the market, I found a minicab station that had some arcade cabinets in it. And I don't think I'd ever seen an arcade cabinet in a public place before. I had like a Commodore 16 at home, or I had like I think it's called a Vectrex, one of those old LCD screen games. But yeah, I'd never seen an arcade cabinet. So yeah, I was only 10. And I walked in there and had like, 20p, I had pocket money then. I think I had like, had some 20p's in my pocket. And I played, and it was Golden Axe, Sega Classic. Wow. Yeah, and I really liked it. I really loved this instantaneous reaction. At the touch of a button, it produces a move on the screen. This was absolutely mind-blowing at 10 years old. And I didn't know what to do, but the objective was pretty clear. Just clear off as many bad guys as you can without losing yourself. But I was instantly addicted. I was instantly hooked. It came at me. It just jumped out at me. You know those movies where the child's watching TV and they get sucked into the TV, like Jumanji, or it was really an experience like that. I was in the game, and so whenever I had time, I would sneak off to the minicab station and play Golden Axe. But then eventually they brought more games in. There wasn't just Golden Axe, it was like Double Dragon, and they've also got Shinobi, they've also got Willow, and they've also got Robocop, and they've also got Salamander. Like, just all these games just kept popping up. And then after a while, I realized that there were more places that also had these games. So, I'd go down the road a couple of numbers down on the same street, and there'll be another arcade, And so eventually it just became a quest among my friends to find out which arcades there were and what games they had. Because, once we realized that each arcade had a different game or had different games, we just wanted to know all the games. So walking around London was super fun in those times, because you could literally stumble upon an arcade with 20 games and you don't know any of the 20 games, and they're all really cool to play. Yeah. So it was very adventurous back then. Of course, I don't think parents worried about the same dangers that kids are faced with today. Yeah. So it's a lot more flexible to have your kid wandering the streets alone, or even with a couple of friends or whatever. But even at a very young age, it was still cool, But yeah, I remember walking hours and hours with friends just looking for arcades, because if you found one, it was all worth it. If you walked for 3 hours and didn't find anything, but then found something with like 3 new games in, that was worth the hours that you walked. It was so much of an adventure to be in London and just walk around looking for places to play. So yeah, that's how my gaming journey started. I had no idea that this would be how it develops, but yeah, that was where it all began. Just these local arcades with different games. It could be a minicab station, it could be a bingo hall, it could be a chip shop, it could be a laundrette. Basically, anywhere where people spent time, they would try to plug arcade cabinets in so that they could make money while people were waiting for whatever, their washing to be done, their minicab, waiting for their food to be made. I mean, one of the biggest arcades I played in as a kid was called Barney's Burger Bar, and it was just a burger bar, they sold kebabs, chips, whatever, right? But it was a sit-down restaurant that had like about 30 or 40 arcade cabinets, which is unheard of today. Wow. Yeah.
I wish I would have gone there. I had
it was on Wandsworth Road. So, like, on the way to Vauxhall, if you know that side of London, you could pass this place called Barney's Burger Bar, and again, a place where I found completely by accident, and it became somewhere. It was a 50-minute walk from home, but I soldiered that walk so many times, because all I would think about on the way is, once I get there, I can play Superman. I can play Bad Dudes versus Dragon Ninja. I can play Joe and Mac Caveman. There was just so many classics. But essentially, playing all these different games, because it was a multitude of genres as well. It wasn't just like side-scrolling beat 'em ups. There were up-scrolling shoot 'em ups. There were puzzle games. There were adventure games, and eventually came one-on-one fighting games. So by the time you got into like the games that you would end up being pro in, you were already very, very seasoned in how to play multiple genres of game very efficiently.
No, it sounds interesting. Elliot, our school and college liaison officer who's moderating the chat, he says, I live in Wimbledon. Is it still there? Do you know?
That is a brilliant question, and if it is, you have to let me know. You could you could potentially try Googling Barney's Burger Bar.
Yeah.
It was, I think the address, if my memory serves me correctly, was 77 Wandsworth Road. So check that out, or just put Wandsworth Road Barney's Burger Bar. It definitely won't have the games in now, but it could be there, or it's probably been, that entire area has probably had complete gentrification. It's probably still there in shape, but it's probably something else now. It's probably a fine dining Italian restaurant or something of that nature. I have no idea. But yeah, that would be the spot, man. Barney's Burger Bar was the spot.
Cool. Ryan, this is a nosy question from me. You've had a lot of nicknames over the years, according to the research I've done online. Prodigal Son, the Terminator, and so on. How did you get some of those, and which do you prefer? Do you still get called them?
Terminator is one of the earliest nicknames that comes to mind. It was given to me by a friend called... actually, was it Hatim who gave me that? I can't remember. No. Okay. So one of the tournament organizers in the UK gave me that name. I was the hitman of the scene. You know, if you want a job done, you get Ryan to do it. And the Terminator name came about because in a match, whenever I was about to lose, whenever I was close to defeat, suddenly this mode would kick in and nothing anyone did would work. Like, I would just be able to come back from anything all the time. It was, I don't know what it was. It was just this extra layer of focus that I would put on once I was close to losing. You know, I'd just kick into this extra 6th gear.
Yeah.
You know, just because I really wanted to win. And that happened constantly. That kept happening. I kept coming back. And so eventually he called me the VF3000 Terminator, which was of course, because it was a Virtua Fighter 3 game, to play on the T1000. So yeah, he said I was a complete robot, and it was almost like this Hulkamania-like state where he's impervious to all attacks and nothing works and you can't defeat him. Yeah. And yeah, I would just I would get the win back somehow. I would claw my way back and I'd eventually win.
That's brilliant.
And then Sujin, which is one of the names. Sujin is just it just means world traveler in Japanese.
Right.
And this name came about because I was the first player in our community to start traveling and becoming integrated in various communities, because I would travel and then I would come home and I'd bring that knowledge back from wherever I've traveled. I'd bring that back to London, bring it back to the UK, and then we'd grow as a community, and then I'd go somewhere else and I'd do the same again. So there was a lot of awareness about me being this traveler that comes and goes and brings back new things and shows new tech that I've learned from a different community and so on. Yeah. So Sujin was that. Prodigal Son is from a 1981 martial arts film. And it's essentially about a boy, a son, who thinks he's the best at martial arts in his town, but he's actually really bad. He completely sucks. But what he doesn't know is that his father pays his opponents to lose because he's worried about his son getting injured. Right. So it was a modest way to approach having a lot of wins in my career. At a certain point, when I was just winning everything, I wanted to have a name that kind of encompassed what I really feel about it, that I'm not this super arrogant person that's unapproachable and I think I'm better than everyone in this completely elitist fashion. No, I was a very down-to-earth, understanding person that this is just something I've put more time into than perhaps other people that are just as talented as me, so I'm getting results from it, and I wanted that to be shown through my name. So Prodigal Son was an effort to have a modest take on winning a lot. But I don't know if it was understood in that form, because I've had so many questions of, is it from the Bible and is it from this band? And it's none of those things. It's never been anything to do with anything else other than this Yun Biao martial arts film, you know. So yeah, so that explains that one.
Thank you. Elliot has said it looks like Barney's has gone. Sadly, I just googled it, so that's a shame.
Okay, it was a long time ago now.
Yeah. Well, one of the most frequent questions we get, Ryan, at British Esports is from young people, all their parents asking, how can I become a pro gamer? What advice, what kind of advice would you give to them? Where should they start?
Oh, I get messages every day on Facebook. People message me, how do I become top 5 in the world? How do I be the best? It's always different with everyone. I try not to generalize because people have different approaches. And people come from different areas where, like it means a certain thing, or they want to be the best in a certain game specifically, not just generalizing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I look back on my history, and for me, it was about fun. Before anything else, before any of the other equations, it was about, do I enjoy this experience? Like, there's no point grinding a game and using all your time to get good at a game if you're not even enjoying that experience. That's one area. The second area is you don't know how good someone else is going to be. You don't know how good a random person that's approached you on social media and asks you advice for is going to be. You have no idea what their potential is. You can give them the benefit of the doubt and talk to them as if they've got the potential to be the best in the world, but you can't guarantee that. You don't know that for sure. So, and also, no matter what you tell them, you have no idea how they're going to apply what you said. If you tell them to be the best, you've got to train 8 hours a day, and you've got to do this, and that. You don't know if they're going to do that. They might train 2 hours a day, and then come back and say, I'm not the best. Why? It's your fault, blah, blah, blah. So I always have to think about all these different things when people ask me these simple questions. They don't realize a lot goes into these answers, But essentially, if they're having fun, then no matter what happens, they'll enjoy the journey. Do you see what I'm saying? Because Absolutely. if the only purpose is seeking that gold medal, lifting that trophy, if that's the only thing they're after and nothing before that means anything, then if they don't get it, then it's going to be quite a sad journey. That long path to failure, that's really hard to deal with. So I feel like if you're playing for the right reasons, which is to enjoy yourself, first of all, no matter what happens along the way, you'll have always had fun. So I think it's always important to emphasize how much enjoyment is key here, that you have a good time, that it's fun. And also, just like in any job, if you enjoy it, you produce better results. You're more productive. You want to, you're willing, you're determined, the hunger is stronger if it's something that means something to you based on your passion for it, not just how much money you can make, not just how many trophies you can win. Do you see what I'm saying? It's a different approach. And a healthier approach as well. Absolutely.
Ryan, look, we're lucky to have you at the British Esports Association on the advisory board. We've got our schools and college championships now for students. You recently visited the Houses of Parliament with the young British Fortnite World Cup runner-up, right? Jaden Ashman, aka Wolfies, and our Vice Chair, Ed Vasey, who has recently stepped down as an MP, but in government. And, what was that like? For me, it was great to see it's 2 different generations of esports pros being recognised by government. And, are you happy to be a part of this, to be inspiring this next generation?
Wow, I mean, it's mind-blowing. It's absolutely phenomenal. I never thought I'd be in a situation where I would get to go to the Houses of Parliament and talk to someone based on my accolades in gaming. That's something that was unheard of when I was coming up. So for me, this is a completely new world. I'm still in awe about that whole day. It was just really, really incredible. It's a great privilege. I feel very special in being put in a position where people can kind of learn from me or look at my path and benefit from seeing what I've experienced. So, I'm very touched by the whole thing, that I was invited and I went there and I met, the MP, I met Ed Vasey, and it was really cool that we were at the table and Theresa May walks past. Like, just the whole entire thing was super cool. And then also, Jaden, I mean, what a character, great young talent, up and coming, genius, might I say, doing really well in school as well. Like, he's someone that you can really be proud of, and a very model gamer for the future, I feel. Someone who's also not just good at the game, but also prioritizing schooling as well, and looking at what's really important. Because one thing that all players need to recognize is tertiary qualifications are valuable. You know, it's worth investing time and going to school and college, and if you want to university or whatever, like it's really, it's something that the world can value you on as well, which is a shame that you have to kind of conform to something that someone doesn't know you but feels is important. But it's one of those things. There's a system, there's a kind of law you need to abide by. Sure, you can do your own thing and maybe get rich that way, but I think it's always good to have something in the back pocket just in case. And education is probably second to none in that department.
Definitely. Right, so last couple of questions, Ryan, just because we're coming up to 3 o'clock. This is a question from someone called Daddy Dark Lord on Twitter, and it's specifically, I think, around Tekken. He said, what brought you to Kaz? What made you stay, and what's your gameplay with Kaz? How is that, or does that change from Tekken to Tekken, or between character matchups?
Yeah. So I started using Kaz on Tekken 2. He wasn't my favourite character, but my best friend at the time, he really liked him, so I kind of just picked him up a bit more. He wasn't in Tekken 3. Then when Tekken 4 came out, there wasn't really a Mishima that was like... Because Tekken Tag was the Tekken before Tekken 4, and I used all the Mishima characters on Tekken Tag. But then when Tekken 4 came out, Kazuya was the only Mishima that really played similar to the way I played Tag. So I picked Kazuya up from there. But Kazuya was a relatively weaker character on Tekken 4. He wasn't one of the best characters in the roster. But that became my challenge. Can I still perform at the top level, having a character that's way weaker, but I still have my skill set? And I managed to win the European Championship in Italy for Tekken 4 with that weaker character. And I think that created a unique bond, like this grind, because I lost so many tournaments before that, you know, trying to like always stick with this weaker character. And everyone was like, you know, you should pick this character, he's stronger, you could do better, you could win more events. And they're probably right. You know, had I picked someone else, maybe I could have won more. But it was a mission for me. I wanted to show that this is, I can do this, you know. Yeah, since that victory, me and Kazuya have been together ever since.
Do you know what, as well? Having played those early Tekken games, I always liked Kazuya, and I saw him as sort of the Ryu of Tekken.
He is, yeah, he's the staple. Tekken 1, he was all over the introduction. Like, he's the character that you saw. He was Tekken.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Ryan, how do you, this is the last one here, how do you sort of see esports changing maybe over the next couple of years? And finally, are there any sort of shout-outs you'd like to give, or anything else you'd like to add? It's been a fascinating chat.
Changes over the next couple of years. Yeah, it's always interesting to think about what may or may not happen, I guess. It's a difficult question, but I feel like we're in a place where it's changing again. Like, you know, I think every couple of years, like, esports sees big changes, you know, we're starting to see gaming become more and more recognized as a sport. And that means more mainstream coverage, that means more exposure, that means, you know, higher levels of awareness raised, and that's really good. And I think we're going to see more of that in the future. I think it's going to be more about gaming becoming slightly more aligned with traditional sports, and that can only be a good thing for gaming, I feel.
Yeah, 100%. Ryan,
one thing that I did want to readdress, because I felt like I didn't properly answer it, but you asked me what advice I would give to up and coming proteges. But I would say play for fun at first. Whatever game it is, play it for fun. I would actually experiment, play multiple games. Find out what game you're really passionate about. Find out what game you really enjoy. Don't just play something because you think that's the game you have to play. Play what you like, and, you know, if you don't like it, play something else, and keep playing different, you know, test out different games until you find something you're happy with. Once you do that, play it for enjoyment. Play it because it's fun. Play it because it's interesting. You know, it's intriguing. It piques your interest. Play it because of those things. And ultimately, if more follows from that, naturally, you know, as a form of progression in your ability on the game, then opportunities will come up for, you know, getting into a team, being part of an org. Like, these things will happen. You don't have to force it. But first and foremost, definitely play for fun and enjoyment. You know, play with your friends, like, be part of a group with your friends, be a team in that way. because that will develop your fundamentals and your foundations in the game, and those things are absolutely paramount when you're part of a professional team or professional org. So yeah, that's what I would advise.
That's great. I've got a lot of clips we can take from this interview and you know, share separately, advice for going prime and things like that. Ryan, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a great interview, and like I say, we'll put it across all our channels hopefully over the next few weeks. You know, I hope to see you again in the future and do more things with you with the British Esports Association.
I'd be very happy to do that. I've got my refuge collection coming up soon, where I basically, you know, like I told you, you know, take food around London and feed the homeless. I'm really excited about doing that, so that's going to be cool. But yeah, there'll definitely be opportunities for us to do stuff in the future as well. I'm excited.
Fantastic. And thanks to everyone for watching, and whether you're on YouTube or Twitch or so on, you know, stay tuned for more interviews we'll be doing in the future. This may be my last one this year, just because I've got twins on the way, so we'll see. We'll have to see what happens.
That's amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, it's going to be a bit crazy, but I'm glad we managed to get this interview in. I'm glad they didn't come early. So
that's cool.
Cheers again, Ryan, and
no worries.
I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, man. Thanks for the time. See you later.
Thanks very much. Bye bye.